Good morning, viewers. You're watching us from iAfrica TV studio. We are here to bring you the latest happenings regarding the testimony of Alaji Martin there at the TRRC. Al Hassan Sise.
Wow, thank you very much, Fatumata. We've just seen someone who has been adversely mentioned and someone who, I mean, the public has been yearning to see, I mean, to come and sit before the commission and then give his testimony as far as, I mean, the allegations that are directed at him are concerned. But anyway, Alaji Martin is someone who joined the army in 1982 to the then gendarmerie. Okay. But we've seen from the introductory part, that's just the beginning of of his testimony. We've just seen a synopsis of the 1994 coup, where he also contradicted some of the witnesses who came before the commission. People like Suare, we've seen Suare, I mean, said he was the very one who led the 1994 coup. But we've seen, contrary to that, from Alaji Martin, and then we've also heard from him the way, I mean, they surrendered at the bridge, saying that the mutineers were more armed than them. That is, they were having a bigger arsenal which they could not stop, and eventually they had to surrender because they felt that they could not stop them. And again, he also highlighted someone, Binet Minty, who was around where the ARC is stationed, who was having a platoon of about 30 men, who was also, I mean, who eventually, subdued to the 1994 mutineers. But interestingly, what just amazed me and will obviously amaze many viewers, that Alaji Martin is saying he did not knew it was actually a coup plot until they, I mean, were about to enter the State House,
exactly.
Which was
so you see, that is where the controversy comes. Before earlier he said that the 1994 coupists were more armed than them, so that is the reason they joined them towards Banjul. But later on, you could see a controversy when he mentioned that they didn't know, they didn't have any idea what was happening until they were about to reach the State House.
Yes. Anyway, that is an interesting portion of it. But we've also seen the relationship of Alaji Martin and the former president Yahya Jammeh, because even in the testimony we've also seen that Alaji Martin was since immediately after the coup, he was permanently stationed at the State House as a state guard, I mean, personnel, and then in fact he was even the close protection of Yahya Jammeh, okay. Which can only be, I mean, done out of confidence and out of trust, because people like Yahya Jammeh, I mean, to have someone around them must be, I mean, that person must be someone who is.
When we talk about trust and confidence during the regime of Yahya Jammeh, some things have to be mentioned. It has to be, you know, people raise eyebrows because we all know what trust and confidence means for Yahya Jammeh. It means you have to do certain things for him and accept certain things.
Obviously. But again, in his testimony, we've seen a conflict of the actual place where the arrest of Sana Sabally took place. Yeah. We've seen the way Yahya Jammeh portrayed to the Gambians that exactly. Sana Sabally actually wanted to kill him, and then he froze where, you know, in fact, many would say that is the beginning of Yahya Jammeh using, I mean, the illusion of his, I mean, in divisibility, or should I say, I mean, you know, the introduction of this black magic issue to the Gambians, the fact that, I mean, it will be very difficult for people to overthrow him or to take him out of power. So we've seen Alaji Martin is saying he and his men arrested Sana Sabally at his floor. That is the second floor, and we understand that Yahya Jammeh was at the third floor, which all the other, I mean, witnesses were like, Sana Sabally was arrested at Yahya Jammeh's corridor, which is just very
conflicting. And even Sana himself stated that he was arrested on Yahya Jammeh's corridor. So you see, this is where the controversies in people's testimonies comes in at the TRC hearings. You know, a lot of them is like you have all these people who are present at one incident.
We have people like Demanjai, exactly. You have Babukar Njai
present at one incident, but for one reason or another, it could be, you know, trying to protect yourself from whatever it is. You see, it brings in a conflict of, you know, controversy in their statements. So it's kind of confusing, and yeah.
Well, and again, there is something which is very interesting. I mean, the council, gave this question, he threw this question, whether Alaji Martin is aware of the charges that were, directed at Sana Sabali. But interestingly, Alaji Martin could not even tell.
I am so happy that we discussed this this morning on our Good Morning show about taking orders and understanding what those orders contain and understanding the implications of all those orders, because we can closely link this to Alaji Martin saying he doesn't know what Sana Sabali was charged with. It's like going to conduct, because I don't understand how anybody can go on an investigation, a claimed so-called investigation, and not know what the person that you are investigating is charged with.
Well, this will really define the status quo at the time when soldiers will just be giving directives, without actually knowing what really is going on. And the other thing is looking at the beatings, meted on Sana Sabali, which Alaji Martin would not agree. He would never accept that it is a torture, according to him. Those were just beatings, and it was very normal at the time, which is around 1994, 95. It was very normal, according to him, to be, beating detainees or people that are alleged with treason. But again, we've seen Alaji Martin saying that beating Sana Sabali is something that is that was actually necessary
At that point.
at that point, which is very
Yes, Al Hassan, civic education is not only important for civilians, but then I think it should be stretched out to the military itself, because you could see clearly what happened in those days. It's like these people clearly knew nothing about, knew little rather about human rights. So for them, beating, he couldn't even differentiate between beating a person and torturing a person. For him, he could, justify himself by, separating beating from torturing. But then in clear sense, and then when you look at the law, beating is actually torturing. And then there was a point where he was trying to, associate the beatings of these, victims with beating of school children, saying that even in our schools we do beat our children. But then just to let you know that even the beatings that are being carried out in schools are illegal. They are human rights violations. They are child abuses that carry, tough consequences.
There, basically, one would say he was trying to justify his actions on the empirical, because even these issues that we are talking about, most often we know they are violations, but we hardly, try to take measures to undo them. And again, if you try to take measures to undo them, some would be like these are Western values that would not, really help in the upbringing of our children. But not to deviate from the main thing, because we know Alaji Martin is someone who really is being adversely mentioned at the TRRC. We've also heard that he's saying, or he said that he was instructed to do a follow-up investigation to actually know whom Sana Sabali was dealing with, that is his plans, who was involved and who was, foiling or things like that. But we've seen many witnesses, people like Chongan, Serif Gomez, we've seen RSM Jeng, Abdullah Dabo, even Sana Sabali himself, saying that Alaji Martin was leading tortures where, they've seen, them bringing electrocution box and carrying hammer, which they will use on these people, people like Sana Sabali, Sadibu Haidara. But interestingly, Alaji Martin is saying all these 5 or 6 witnesses or more are saying that
yes, Al Hassan. As I said, there's too much controversy in the testimonies going on right now at the TRRC, because as you've mentioned, we have a lot of witnesses that actually confirmed that Alaji Martin was carrying a hammer and also some electrocution materials. Even some of the people that were involved in the torture, accepted.
Well, that is the point that really would amaze most of the viewers or the listeners, that Chongan, Serif Gomez, RSM Jeng, Sana Sabali. In fact, the interesting part is we've seen Pa Modusar. Pa Modusar was a witness who testified. Just yesterday. Accepting the fact that he meted, certain atrocities on one Babukar Sanyang, which was presided by Alaji Martin, and And in his testimony, what is more fascinating is that uh, he said Almamo Mane told him that you've seen the way we were doing. That was they were using these
Yeah.
nylon bags on Sana
Yeah.
Sabali and on Sadibu Haidara.
Yeah.
So when it came to Babukar Sanyang,
Yeah.
he was instructed and asked, "You've seen the way we were doing, so you're also going to do the same."
Yeah.
But interestingly, again, Alaji Martin is saying the nylon bags were only used on Babukar Sanyang, which is just very.
Al Hassan, what I can tell you is that he has been denying a lot. There have been a lot of questions that have been asked to him by Council Fal, but he has denied. But then he just has to make sure that he has enough or concrete evidence, to defend all those denials. But in the meantime, Al Hassan, I think we will have to end the discussion on the TRRC hearing right now. But just to take you through, viewers, on leading headlines in the studio. Good afternoon, viewers in the African continent and beyond. You're watching the headlines this hour on iAfrica TV, and I am Fatma Tajajo once again. The most adversely named and General Martin testifies today. The most adversely named torturer in the Jammeh's 22 years regime, General Alaji Martin, testified before the TRRC today's public hearing in connection to his involvement in the 1994 coup and alleged participation in several unhuman tortures of the detainees at the Central Prison in Malto. Evidence has suggested Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, including some senior Saudi officials, are liable for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, according to the UN rights investigator Agnes Callamard. The UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions called for countries to widen sanctions to include the Crown Prince and his personal assets until and unless he can prove he has no responsibility. Khashoggi, a critic of the prince and a Washington Post columnist, was last seen at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd, where he received papers ahead of his wedding. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres also described the killing of Jamal Khashoggi as horrendous crime, according to a UN spokesperson.
The Secretary General, as we've been saying, does not have the power or the authority to launch criminal investigations without a mandate from a competent intergovernmental body. Power and authority to do that lies with member states. If a full and effective criminal investigation is not conducted by member states, the only way to effectively pursue an investigation requiring the cooperation of relevant member states would be through a resolution of the Security Council under the appropriate charter provisions, and all member states should cooperate with those efforts.
Carried out by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
The report was conducted by a special rapporteur who, as you know, and we've said often, are independent of the Secretary General. They are appointed by the Human Rights Council. It's not for the Secretary General to agree or not agree with what the special rapporteur reports. There are a couple of recommendations aimed at the Secretary General, as there are recommendations to the Security Council, to individual member states, and I think it's everyone's responsibility to study those recommendations.
Mandate from
Kenyan court has convicted 3 people of terrorism-related offenses for helping the East African terrorist group who carried out an attack on a university that killed 148 people, most of them students, in 2015. The Garissa University attack is said to be the worst such attack in the East African state since Al-Shabaab bombed the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, killing 258 people.
Due to the number of
China's President Xi Jinping arrived in Pyongyang for a summit amid a holding out the prospect of fresh measures to support North Korea's floundering, sanctions-bound economy. The visit comes as tensions flare once again between the Washington and Pyongyang over Trump's efforts to get North Korea to ditch its nuclear weapons. This visit of the Chinese president is said to be the first trip in 14 years by a Chinese leader. Well, viewers, that's all we have for you on the news headlines. For more and these and other stories, log on to our website, iAfrica.tv. I am Fatmata Jaju. We'll continue with the TRC. Stay tuned.